Good morning, little Panthers. My name is Mr. Seager. I'm the superintendent here at the school. And today I'm going to be reading chapter 8 from the book that we've all been reading, Mysteries According to Humphrey. I know you guys have been into this book for a couple of weeks, and I'm going to read chapter 8 to you today. Chapter 8 is titled The Case of the Mysterious Messages. Mamma mia, what happened here? Aldo said as he pulled his cleaning cart into the room and looked around. I looked around too, and what I saw was almost as scary as Halloween. The room is a mess. On the floor are scraps of paper, yarn, buttons, beads, markers, crayons. On top of the tables were scissors and overturned glue bottles. There was glitter glistening on the floor like snow. Eek, 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 I squeaked. Boing, 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 Og twanged. Aldo leaned on his broom and shook his head. I can tell Mrs. Brisbane wasn't here today. She never leaves her room messy at the end of the day. That's for sure, I agreed. Aldo didn't have much time to talk. He was too busy sweeping and spraying and scrubbing and mopping up the room. He stopped when he saw that stack of cards. Oh, they're making cards for Miss Brisbane. Great idea, he said. I'd like to send her a card myself. Me too, I squeaked. Boing, boing, Og agreed. After the room was in order and the art supplies neatly stacked on Mrs. Brisbane's desk, Aldo took out his lunch, pulled up a chair close to Og's tank and my cage. When he finished eating, he went over to Mrs. Brisbane's desk, took a piece of paper, and wrote something on it. He folded it in half. Then he wrote a smaller piece of paper and stuck it on top of the folded paper. Now the substitute will include my card with the others, Aldo said. Can you write one for me? I squeaked. Aldo usually seems to understand me, but that night he didn't. Well, I've got to run, he said. I'll be late getting home tonight and I have to study for a test. Then he looked around the room, but at least the room is clean. Yes, Aldo, you did a great job, I told him. I meant it too. Aldo is very, very, very good at his job. Thanks, Humphrey, Aldo said. He wheeled his cart out of the room and turned off the light. Luckily, a big full moon was making the room nice and bright. It had been a difficult day, but I was feeling pretty brighter myself. Og, I think I'll check out those cards, I said, after Aldo's car left the parking lot. Maybe I'll get more clues about what happened to Mrs. Brisbane. Boing, boing, Og said. I'm not sure if he thought my idea was good or was just excited to see the froggy food sticks. I took my usual path to get to Mrs. Brisbane's desk and had no trouble. I made it, Og, I told my friend who was splashing around in his tank. I looked up, up, up. The stack of cards was about 6 hamsters high. There was a bright yellow card with sparkles near the bottom. It was sticking out a bit from the rest of the pile, so I decided to grab it and pull. And that was a big mistake because as the card came out, the whole of the stack, the whole pile tumbled down around me and on me. Luckily, paper doesn't weigh too much. I wasn't hurt, just surprised. Still, I now had a chance to look at all the cards and possibly gather more clues about Mrs. Brisbane's disappearance. The yellow card with sparkles was from Rosie. The front had red hearts and bright buttons. Inside it said, Mrs. Brisbane, I miss you the most. Come back and I'll pop a wheelie for you. Love, Rosie. The last part was in a big red heart. I'm not sure Mrs. Brisbane would be happy to see Rosie pop a wheelie for her. That's a trick she can do with her wheelchair. But Mrs. Brisbane made her promise not to do it at school anymore. I guess Rosie just meant she'd be happy to see our teacher back in the classroom. Then I looked at the blue card. It was from Small Paul. On the front was a drawing of a rocket. Inside it said, I hope you'll be launched back into room 26 soon. I miss you. Paul F. Eek, I squeaked. Had Mrs. Brisbane been launched into outer space? Dear Mrs. B, when you come back to room 26, I promise to help you out all the time. You don't have to worry about anything because I'll be here for you now and forever. If you ever need something, please call on me. Your true friend for all time, Holly. Thomas's card was covered with red, white, and blue yarn. It read, "You're the best teacher in the universe, Thomas." Sometimes Thomas exaggerates, but this time I thought he was right. But I was shocked when I read what he wrote at the bottom. P.S. I'm the best juggler in class. I can juggle for hours without dropping a ball, just like my dad. And that just wasn't true. Why did a nice boy like Thomas make up things like that? The next card was white with fancy purple letters. It said, "Sometimes I forget things, but I never forget all the nice things you do for us. Come back soon. Love, Phoebe." I felt a little pang for Phoebe. She was forgetful, but she was also extremely nice. Kelsey's card had a drawing of a ballet dancer on it. Inside it said, "Hope you'll be up on your toes soon," from Kelsey. There was a very plain orange card with blue letters. No glitter, no beads, no buttons. It said, "I'm not good at fancy words, but I miss you. Just Joey." Joey's card was nice and simple. I knew Mrs. Brisbane would like it because it sounded like him. "Og, these cards are so nice," I shouted to my friend. "Our friends did a great job." He splashed around in a happy sounding way. I read all the cards. The more I read, the more I wished I could make a card for Mrs. Brisbane too. I looked over at the art supplies, markers, crayons, glue, glitter. Make very nice looking cards. But I also knew they were dangerous, at least to hamsters. Hamsters like me don't wash our paws in soap and water. In fact, soap and water aren't good for us at all. No, no, no. We groom ourselves using our tongues and paws. So if I got glue or marker on my paws and licked it off, I might get very sick. Maybe I could add some pizzazz. Mr. E had suggested that. But I looked and looked and looked, and I couldn't find any jar or bottle that was marked pizzazz. I just have to make a plain card just like Joey's. I went slowly back to my cage. All the cards were great, but one stuck in my mind. Kelsey had said she hoped Mrs. Brisbane would be up on her toes soon. Up on her toes. That sounded like a clue. Was Mrs. Brisbane actually going to be a ballet dancer? I tried to imagine our teacher with her short gray hair and her sensible shoes twirling around like a ballerina. She didn't look like a dancer in Kelsey's music box. But if Mrs. Brisbane wanted to be a ballerina, then that's where she should be, even though I think she makes a better teacher. I pulled out my little notebook and pencil from behind my mirror. First, I added a clue to my list. Clue 5. Mrs. Brisbane may be learning to be a ballet dancer. I wasn't sure about that, so I added a couple of question marks. Next, I turned the page and thought about what to write to my teacher. I wanted to say just the right thing. I thought and thought and thought some more. Sometimes it's easier to say something when you feel in your heart with a poem. So let me reread that. Sometimes it's easier to say something you feel in your heart with a poem. And so I wrote, "Roses are red, violets are blue. Oh, Mrs. Brisbane, how much I miss you." I looked at it and I liked it. And so I signed it, Humphrey. I read it to Og. "Boing, boing, boing, boing," he twanged. "Oops, sorry, Og." And then I replied, "Og, too." "I signed your name too, Og," I assured my neighbor. He can't write, at least I don't think he can write. He doesn't have a notebook, and if he did, it'd have to be waterproof. So I tore the page from the notebook, but when I looked at it, it seemed a little too plain. I didn't know how to make it fancier. I looked around my cage and dug around in my bedding. All I came up with was a tiny piece of carrot I'd saved and a strawberry Kelsey had bought. It was the juiciest strawberry I'd ever seen. "Og, I have a great idea," I squeaked. I rubbed my paws all over the strawberry to get them nice and juicy. Then I made little red paw prints around the edge. It looks so nice, if I do say so myself. And when I was finished, I licked the red juice off my paws. Yummy. Of course, then I had to take the card over to the desk. I picked up the paper with my teeth, jiggled the lock that doesn't lock, and opened the door to my cage. Og splashed gently in his tank as I passed by. Oh, I said. Of course, as soon as I opened my mouth, the paper dropped to the table. Dropped to the table. Sorry, Og, I said. I wish you could add your mark too. Boing, Og answered, splashing. Or maybe you can. I'm leaving the card here, I explained. Then I'll go behind my cage, splash some water, and then I'll come back from the card. I left the paper near his tank, scurried away, and squeaked, Now! Og splashed and splashed some more. Not too much. You can stop now. I waited until Og stopped splashing and raced back to the paper. There were several little watermarks on the paper. I hoped, and hoped Mrs. Brisbane would know that Og had made them. I picked up the paper with my teeth again and made my second trip of the night down the table leg and back to the desk. The stack of cards was now a mound of cards. There was no way a small hamster could stack them all up again, so I just pushed my card into the pile. Then I made the long trek back to my cage and closed the door behind me. Morning light streamed in through the window and I was worn out. Good night, Og, I said as I crawled into my sleeping hut. Good morning. I guess he was tired too because he didn't answer. Not even one boing. Or if he did answer, I couldn't hear him because I was sound asleep. So, Humphrey's Detectionary. Finding clues can make you unsqueakably tired.